and welcome to another episode of Let's Talk with Greg and
Thomas.
and also I am not a brunette anymore. Those are some very sad episodes, y'all. So I'm glad to be back with my red hair. And also today we are having the awesome Desmond Price from Independent Thought. He hosts a podcast. You can get listen to Independent Thought wherever you get your podcasts. So it's on Spotify, it's on what's it called now? Apple Podcasts or iPod? Yeah. Google Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts, it's there. And a link to Independent Thought will be in the description below. All right, now let's go ahead and get into the episode. All right, and welcome our amazing guest, Desmond Price. Hello.
Hello, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. How's it going?
Not too bad. Just spent the day doing a little bit of research, getting ready for my next episode. Just trying to be dialed in, give all the right takes.
And as mentioned earlier, you run the podcast Independent Thought. Go ahead and tell us about it and how you even started with your own thing.
So the podcast is called Independent Thought. It's mostly about politics, but we also sprinkle in other conversations about just different things going on in life. I've had conversations about growing up in the city or starting your own business, or I had a life coach come on, an empowerment coach come on and talk about the importance of positivity. So there is conversations outside of politics, but it's about 95% a political podcast. I'm someone who's more on the left, but I don't really identify I guess in any particular area. I just like to basically call out nonsense when I see it. That's my big thing. So I would say the podcast more or less got started because I was watching the 2020 primary season when there was 7,200 Democrats running for office. And I was just and I was seeing just a lot of terrible takes in the media, especially shots at candidates like Bernie and Andrew Yang and stuff like that. And I always had conversations with friends of mine about politics, and we kind of just decided to make a podcast of just us talking about politics, which quickly became my solo podcast. So it just never stopped after that.
It's so funny. I basically have a similar journey with you because I started really getting into the more advocacy part when I joined the Bernie campaign. That's how I met Thomas, is through the Bernie campaign in our local city here in Pomona, California. And we even opened an office together. Now that when the pandemic hit, that's when I started being more into politics. That's how we created our first podcast together, which was Okay, Now What? And then now we have this. So that's amazing how our frustrations have led us to this.
They'll manifest in all types of ways.
So today we're going to be talking about the importance of independent media. And this is what this is right now. And this is what you're doing too. So my question for you is is it important to you that we have more people doing this, where we're spreading the message? I'm trying to find my question. I'm so sorry. Where we're spreading the message without the toxic bias of the corporate media.
I mean, absolutely. I think, some people, I'm sure there's always a detraction for every advantage of having more voices in this space. But I think in the grand scheme of things, when we talk about the giant pie chart of all the good things versus all the bad things, there's way more good things when you have multiple people being able to essentially check each other versus having a consolidation around 3 or 4 or 5 major news sources, which, as we know, can be and are corrupted by just several corporations who will find ways to influence how news gets aired, if it gets aired, how it's covered when it gets aired. So I think now more than ever, especially in this age of misinformation, disinformation flying all over the place, I think it's very important to have as many people as possible, fact checking each other so that there is a broader form of what we think of as consensus.
Yeah, I agree. Thomas, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's very important. I think last few. I mean, it was prior for me because obviously my home country is the UK, and I saw what happened to Jeremy Corbyn as Labour leader, and the outright. It was so blatant. I'd never seen it so blatant before. Before this happened, before we had someone like Jeremy Corbyn as Labour leader, and it was so viscerally ridiculous, like the amount of like media publicity and just outright fabrication of sources of stories, and I think that's what really led me to realize that this the way things are with media in the current landscape is just not working. It's not informing people, it's not helping anybody. It's very very one-sided
And
in
it's
a way
very,
that
oh, I'm so sorry, Thomas.
no, you're right, go on.
It's like, to follow up with that, like, it's very misleading, like, especially like
Yeah,
when, like, now with COVID, now they're
yeah,
talking about how to live with COVID versus how do we prevent from people from dying and getting sick. That's our conversation now, living with COVID. Imagine if we had talked like that in the Trump administration. What the hell?
I mean, we kind of did. I mean, the media was doing the rounds with like obviously this is more like a Republican talking point, but they were doing the rounds of, well, if grandma and grandpa have to die for the economy, so be it.
Oh yeah.
That was during the Trump administration. So it kind of was already there. It was more like because they didn't have the vaccine at that point, they were more sort of. We can't lean into that too much because we just don't have an alternative, and people know there is an alternative. But now it's even more blatant because obviously the Biden administration, well, America's policy is vaccines will solve everything, but it's without economic help, without safety measures in place, without all the other stuff, we're not going to get anywhere.
Desmond, do you want to add on? Or
if you could envision what should be done versus what is being done, what should be done in your like particular opinion, Thomas?
Well, I mean, first and foremost, the enactment of the idea that we're just lifting masks, for example, right now, which is happening under the Biden administration, which is they're lifting it completely, and we know it's so blatantly political because of the midterms coming up.
Yes.
And the science, I mean, the science keeps changing to suit whatever administration is in office, but that's another whole topic because it's the science has become so politicized that you've got people who we're sort of on the fence and now just not taking it seriously, and it's going to be a generational thing. It's going to be like AIDS all over again, and I think we needed obviously we still need vaccines and vaccine rollout, and we need testing, we still need masking, we still need these bare minimum safety precautions in place. To be quite honest, the very beginning of the pandemic was the time to have tackled this, and obviously we didn't have a zero COVID policy initially, and that was the time to really get a foothold in it, and now it's just a case of we have to try and recover from it, or try.
And also, if we had paid
somehow.
people, if we had just paid people to stay home, we would not be in this mess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous. Now, I want to like move the conversation to like when to independent keeping independent media um more reliable, because when I was getting into the whole political movement, um I watched the Young Turks and I really
Yeah.
liked them for a long time.
Yeah.
And then they turned into something else and they kind of went corporate. And my question to y'all is, how do we keep that from happening to other media outlets, that like other independent media outlets that are great? You know, we want to keep them that way.
I mean, how much control do you really have over it at the end of the day? I
Yeah.
mean, individual people, if they decide that they want to go that route, I don't know that anyone could truly stop them. I mean, that's the choice that they made. And then I think people really need to embrace their own power in this situation and realize that, you're the consumer. And so if you don't like what they're providing, then stop engaging with them. And that's going to eventually affect them anyway, in the sense that they're not going to have those ad dollars coming in. They're not going to have the subscriptions that they rely on, so on and so forth. You basically have to just embrace your power as the person who consumes the media, realizing that that is the leverage you have over them. Maybe leave a nasty comment if you want to. But, truthfully speaking, TYT was never my type of thing. I appreciated commentary on there occasionally, but I always kind of found Jank to be a little abrasive.
God,
So,
okay, I agree. Like Jank is so
yeah.
annoying. I mainly watched for Anna.
Yeah.
But Thomas, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think what people I mean, now that we have all these alternative sources, but the reality is that traditional media is still predominantly horrendously strong.
Yes.
To a point where it is can sway public opinion dramatically, with whichever way they want it to go, and that's happening right now with what's happening in Ukraine. It's crazy. It's really wild to me to see that Sky News is literally did a Molotov video. I don't know if you've seen this, where they were showing Ukrainian citizens actually making Molotovs on video and going into extreme detail, and that. And that's great. It's great to see that, but where was that with Palestine? Or where was that? And so it's so blatantly biased to a degree, and it's so powerfully biased as well.
I want to also add, when it comes to the bias of the corporate media, like they pick and choose what's going to be newsworthy. Like when it comes to like hate crimes, when the Stop Asian Hate movement was happening, people are like, oh, Asian hate doesn't really exist. You know, you never really see it like a story in the news about it. I'm like, yeah, that's the problem. It's not covered enough because people are fixated on police brutality, and it's mainly, to, people who are Black, and they need to be covering every story of every person who is affected by hate crimes and hate in this country, because if you don't see it, you're not going to know that it's happening. Like, what the hell?
Yeah. It's a weird conundrum that I like to like bring, I guess, like the third perspective in here, because on one hand, I think if you actually come down to the lowest common denominator, the issue with corporate media is the profit motive aspect to it, because they might rebut by saying, well, when we run certain stories, they don't get the same level of coverage, and we're basically just here to make the most money as possible, right? And so, as upsetting as that sounds, it also like puts a little bit of blame on the consumer. But then it's like, well, maybe if you show the story more, maybe we would care more, because maybe we care about these things because you keep showing us the same stories over and over again.
Yeah.
So it's really, I don't know, it feels like a murky situation, but at the end of the day, it does feel as though one of the main issues with news is that there's too much financial incentives tied into how we get our information disseminated to us.
Yeah. And this is for the US and also UK in some regard. The power that that traditional media has to make you care about certain conflicts while ignoring others, and then many of which the US plays an active role in, and in creating and sustaining those conflicts, is truly extraordinary. And we're seeing that right now with what's happening with Ukraine. And,
so they're able to show an atrocity happening with Russia invading, Ukraine, but at the same time, other atrocities don't get this level of coverage. You don't see the coverage of Palestine. You don't see the coverage of Syria,
7 years.
Yemen, Somalia. I mean, you don't see the coverage of those things happening. Not saying that what's happening in Ukraine isn't a tragedy, but they're all tragedies. But one of them is getting wire-to-wire coverage, and the rest of them don't. I mean, they might make the ticker.
Yeah. I mean, one could argue, oh, well, it's very significant because a European country hasn't been attacked like this in over, this many years. And I'm like, okay, but this is happening now also here. Show it all is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And it's back to what you said, Desmond, about the profit motive. We saw this in the 2016 election with Trump, and how Trump's empty podium was so profitable for people like CNN and MSNBC, that because it was attracting so many viewers, so many clicks, it's so much ad revenue generated from that alone. You could argue they were directly responsible for Trump winning in the way that he did.
Yeah, no, the hypocrisy
in the way that he did.
The hypocrisy is overwhelming.
But it's I truly believe it's a combination between obviously the profit motive and also who owns that media, and the bias that comes with who owns that media. Like, it's very interesting to me. Like, I bring up the Molotov story because if you go back to, I don't know if you remember what happened in Ferguson, there was oh god, I'm sorry, my head here. There was a guy named Edward. There's a guy named Edward Crawford, there's a very famous picture of the Ferguson riots of him throwing it wasn't a Molotov, but it was basically throwing back I don't know, it's what the police use, like a gas canister or whatever. He's throwing it back at the police, and the coverage of that at the time was horrendously against someone like Edward Crawford, and now you're seeing a complete swing in the way that they cover people making or like throwing contraptions like this, and it's so blatantly like I said, it's so blatantly biased. Oh, I applaud the fact that they're showing like these Molotov stories and like Ukrainian descent, Ukrainian it's amazing to see the civilian population prepared in this way to fight back against invasion. I would just want the media to be a little bit more,
tell the whole story,
not hypocritical. Not choose when this is the right thing or not. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
I also want to ask another question. Moving on some of the similar lines. I feel like our news outlets, every outlet, whether it's conservative or left wing or whatever, the main job of the news and journalism is to check our government. Also, it's to press them and hold them accountable. What I don't like is how the corporate media kind of like rubs shoulders with them. How they'll paint the establishment to be like for example, they'll ask Hillary Clinton, what are some ways to win an election? She lost an election. A pretty easy one to win, by the way. You know, when you have a buffoon like Trump. But she still lost. Or the MSNBC kept doing this. They had this moderate come on who lost an election, and she said, well, the problem with the Democrats losing elections is because they keep saying stuff like defund the police. When your moderate ass lost an election and now a Republican has it. Give me your thoughts on all this, because it just pisses me off.
I think everyone will be better off when they come to the realization that that first statement you said is not correct. And I don't mean that in a mean way. But the news is not there to actually check the government. That is the idealistic of what we want them to be. It's what they should be. It's not what they are. What they are is a business. And they have complete.
Well, that's what I meant. It was like, it should be like that.
It should be like that. But I think too many people go to the news expecting the truth. You know, they're expecting the truth. They're expecting non-biased coverage. They're expecting it to be like, you know, like this, and this. What they're actually getting is whatever they think is profitable, whatever they think is going to keep your eyes glued to the station, and whatever is advantageous for whatever political sphere they've tied themselves into. CNN, MSNBC, Democrats, Fox News, Republicans. So I think when you kind of like pull the veil back a little bit and you realize what the game actually is, it allows you to at least like see through the fog a little bit, you know, and realize that when you go to those news stations, that isn't the news. It's just, I'm sorry, it just really isn't.
Yeah.
You know, Fox News is like, they've openly said they're basically just entertainment.
Yeah, they don't even have like a news credential. So why is Fox News even in their title?
It's a great question.
Like Fox Entertainment.
That is more effective. I think they actually used that defense in court when Tucker Carlson was being sued.
Well, so Rachel Maddow. Maddow's the same thing, because that show got sued also, and he used the legal defense of I'm not actually a news source. I'm an entertainment source. But like I said before, I come back to it's a combination of it's a profitable business, and then also is a combination of who owns and runs the media. I mean, I can't remember if it's a couple of episodes ago now, but we discussed this, Greg, when we watched that video of that journalist who is questioning about the U.S. intelligence services were saying that it was going to be a false flag operation by Russia, and the evidence was, we're telling you, that's the evidence. And the journalist was merely just asking for where is the evidence, and there isn't any. And he was so shocked. He was so shocked that someone was pushing him like that for actual evidence of this source. And that is how deep, that is how lackluster, I should say, news or journalists, or just the idea of just questioning US intelligence services, or UK is the same. Just the mere idea of questioning the information that's coming out is just a no-go. Like, and that's very telling.
Can I play devil's advocate for a minute? I like these moments. Let's say for a moment that maybe that is that one time, or maybe one of the very few times, where they couldn't tell you the truth. Because, like, for instance, we know, I think the CIA, NSA, they get billions of dollars every year to conduct surveillance, you know, I think on us and everyone in the world, basically, right? You know, this shadow regime that they have going on. If they were saying that Russia was going to invade, Russia has invaded. So it wasn't entirely false about the whole. I think, like, you know, obviously how they were going to do it has changed, but, you know, they did accurately say that was going to happen. It wouldn't be that strange to say that, you know, one of those organizations actually has people implanted within the Russian government or in the Russian military. And if that is the case, you really couldn't say definitively where your evidence came from, because you'd be outing your source. I'm just wanted to throw that out there a little bit.
But why not say that then? Why like,
because if you, I mean, maybe you don't want to alert people to the fact that you have someone implanted in their government.
Not like, I mean, I agree with you. Of course, we need to protect our people wherever they may be.
Yeah.
But bring some level of honesty to the table, is what
I will say this though. I'm glad that journalist did push though, because that was the right thing to do, because there have been too many times in the past where we've just been told to like, just shut up and just accept the information that's being given to you. So that was the right move by that journalist. And I was glad that they didn't, didn't just push once, they pushed again and again and again and again. Actually, I watched this interview that you're referring to. It was definitely the right thing to do. But at the same time, I think, just trying to like look at it from the other position, I understand why you might want to withhold that information.
Yeah.
But look at the American response to freedom of journalistic integrity. Look at what they're doing to Julian Assange. And then when you take that into consideration, look what they did to Chelsea Manning. Chelsea Manning, Manning, and the imprisonment and treatment of her is absolutely disgusting. And the treatment of Julian Assange, who's been, it's been what, like a decade? I don't know how long it's been. It's been so long. The way that they've been chasing, and they're making an example that this is what happens when you go against the narrative of the American government and you make us look like a laughingstock. Yeah, and it's a clear, if you're let's say a real journalist, this is what you have coming to you if you decide to publish information that makes the American government
look bad,
have to do a U-turn or have to do something that he wouldn't have normally done if this information hadn't been published.
Yeah, it really.
No one would have known about what happened in Afghanistan if Julian Assange hadn't published that American soldiers were killing innocent civilians in helicopters. That we would never have known. Never would have been published. This news would never have come out. And this is what happens to a journalist for doing that.
It really disappoints me because I'm a journalism major and I want to be able to, write whatever the truth is. And it's kind of scary. Like, oh, am I going to end up like Julian Assange or Edward Snowden and Chelsea Manning? Like, what the hell? And it really questions like our First Amendment, Do we even have it?
No, it's a great point. And that is the risk that anyone takes when they decide to do this. And it's not right. And it's important to keep having these conversations, to continue to keep it on the forefront of everyone's minds so that they don't get away with it, because it will happen if people stop talking about it. If people forget about Julian Assange, if they forget about Edward Snowden, then absolutely it sets the precedent that it could happen to somebody else. So
well, Desmond, thank you so much for coming on to the show. I really appreciate your time with us. Go ahead and shout out your stuff, your social media, your podcast, and of course, the link to your podcast will be in our description.
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Desmond Price. The podcast is called Independent Thought. You can find it on most major platforms, Apple, Spotify, basically everywhere else. I'm on social media on Instagram and Twitter at Independent Thought. Thanks for having me on today.
Yeah. All right. Well, you take care. And folks, we'll see you next Monday with another episode of Let's Talk with Greg and
Thomas.
All right. Bye-bye, folks.